And welcome back to the Hot Lap. We are talking F1 testing data analysis, but that is not the only story we're talking about. Yes, the pressure has begun to build, potentially already on a certain individual. That individual is Sergio Perez, under pressure already. We'll get into that story as well. And I think planetf1.com have got a few questions from testing that have been answered, a few bullet points as well we'd like to get into. But F1 testing analysis, who is the fastest? Well, let's find out. This is going to be data. I mean, we could be wrong. There's lots of caveats here. But as you can see, from this absolutely wonderful website, let me just spool it up properly here, from Twitter, Formula Data Analysis. As you can see here, they're suggesting that the Ferrari best low grip speed, all-rounded question mark for the Mercedes, best downforce for the Red Bull, highest drag or lowest power unit mode for the McLaren, and worst cornering but the most fuel maybe for the Aston Martin. Well, what's interesting here is the SF24, the Ferrari, its top speed was matched with the RB20, Red Bull's Challenger, at 319 kilometers per hour. Fastest corner for the SF20 was 205. That's -7 on the fastest. Slowest corner, it was really good, as suggested here, 67, and it did have the best lap time. Now the W15, to be fair, one of their problems last year was that their car was really draggy, wasn't it? Not good in a straight line. A couple of suggestions why. The zero pod concept put pressure on the engine cooling, so they couldn't run the engine maybe as strong, potentially, and the fact that it just was a really draggy car. But only 1 kilometre per hour slower than the SF24 and the RB20. I think that's a massive thumbs up for Mercedes. Fast speed corners, they were 10 kilometres down. Could that be, once again though, these caveats? This is where the caveats come into play. Could that be just set up? We don't know. And could that car still be a bit draggy? But that's why they can get the high speed. The slowest corner, they were just 2 miles down. Sorry, 2 kilometers per hour down, and they had a reasonable lap time. The RB20 top speed 319, matching the SF24. 212, the fastest car in the corners. That pure aerodynamics. Adrian Newey genius, Red Bull team genius. There, just 1 kilometer down on the slowest corner against Ferrari. Now the McLaren 315, so one of the slowest out of what we believe to be the top 4 teams, the slowest in the top speed. Could that be, it says here, lowest power unit mode, or a really draggy car? Who knows? I remember in 2021 they were really fast, weren't they, in a straight line? Hence Danny Ricciardo won Monza with Lando Norris second, their last victory. But the fastest corners aren't particularly great either. 5 kilometers per hour down, not as bad as Mercedes, and 4 kilometers down in the slowest corner. And that's the last couple of years. That's been one of McLaren's biggest weaknesses, is these slow corners. Think turn 9 and 10 in Bahrain. We mentioned that in our testing preview. So, last but not least, the AMR24, the Aston Martin. Top speed, like the W15, just 1 kilometre per hour down. Fastest corner, really slow, 17. Potentially the worst cornering, it says, but maybe they had the most fuel on. Slowest corner, again, 4 kilometres down as well. So, still question marks. I mean, Will BUXton has come out on Twitter and he said, so day 3 of testing, I think our slightly tweaked competitive order is, usual caveats involved, he's going for Red Bull fastest. I think everyone is going to say Red Bull fastest. Ferrari second, which I do believe is the general consensus going around the paddock, going around the media, going around the experts, seem to think that Ferrari is second. But now here is where the water completely muddies, I think, with the next 3. McLaren he's got as third, Aston fourth, Mercedes only 5th. But some people have suggested Mercedes are behind Ferrari. Some people have suggested that it's McLaren directly behind Ferrari. Not many people have suggested it's Aston behind Ferrari being the third team. Many people have suggested that Aston is somewhere behind McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari. But next up we've got the RB, Williams next. So Williams ahead of Alpine, Sauber and Haas, he's saying. So Haas obviously the slowest, which I don't think is too much surprise. I mean, in terms of the 2 fastest and slowest, the bookends of the fastest and slowest on the grid, I think a lot of people, Red Bull, Haas, No one's really going to argue with that, but it's interesting, and I don't think that's too far off, really. I mean, if that ends up being something similar to qualifying, I, though, would probably put the Aston as the slowest in terms of the second tier, and that's Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, and then Aston maybe. I think the McLaren and the Mercedes are quite close to each other, but I do feel the Ferrari has an edge. And this is estimated pace, though, and this is interesting, based on race simulations from Fastest Pit Stop. This was yesterday. This was posted yesterday evening. So we've got, so you can see here, we've got Red Bull. Surprise, surprise, fastest. Mercedes, just shy of half a second down, but then Red Bull half a second down. Aston Martin 0.55 down. McLaren 1.1 seconds down, you see. Racing Bulls, RB 1.1. Williams 1.3. Sauber 1.45. Alpine 1.5. And Haas 1.6. So that is, in terms of race pace, interesting. But a lot of people have said the race pace of the Ferrari was really, really impressive. So I don't know where they're quite getting their analysis from, but it's interesting, isn't it? And the exciting thing is, going into that first race in Bahrain, we don't know. Next up, this is from Lights Out. This is the fastest sectors, as you can possibly see here. And so in terms of the fastest sector, the fastest sector 1 of testing data was the Aston Martin. Sector 2 was the Ferrari. Sector 3 was the Mercedes. And yeah, obviously, as we know, the Ferrari were fastest overall. In terms of the slowest sectors, I mean, Alpine had two of the 3 slowest sectors. Haas only had the one, which is quite interesting. Red Bull was the third fastest in that first sector and that second sector. Williams are up there. They had a really good, solid sector 3. Once again, all caveats being we don't know what engine modes and fuel that they were running. But it makes for really, really interesting reading. But I do feel, as I said, the order is as suggested. Let's go back to Will Buxton's. Yeah, I disagree with that. I think Red Bull, I'm going for Red Bull, Ferrari, but this is overall, Mercedes and McLaren are really, really close. Then the Aston, and then I think RB, Williams, Sauber, Alpine, Haas. So now let's get into this story, which I thought was quite interesting, and this is where we're talking about the pressure is on. The pressure is on Sergio Perez already, thanks to a comment by Helmet Marko, and this kind of stuff is not going to help, is it? It says here, Max Verstappen was 6 to 7 tenths faster than Sergio Perez on average during testing. Perez needs to get Max out of his head and drive his own program, according to Helmet Marko. And here's one of the news posts about it on Essentially Sports. F1 News, Helmet Marko fires stern warning to Sergio Perez as Max Verstappen exposes a dark reality. All the news here, but let's get into that Sergio Perez thing. So, and it says at one point, Sergio Perez was so far behind Verstappen, he had to go back to the factory to dig deep and understand why he lagged. It was the Qatar Grand Prix where Checo finished 1 minute and 20 seconds. That is 80 seconds behind his teammate. Imagine that. Almost an entire lap down in the most dominant car in the history of the sport. And that was a weekend that Sergio Perez did not really have too much of an issue. 80 seconds. But he returned with a vengeance and scored some decent results towards the end of the season. However, it says, it looks like 2024 will be another difficult season for him, as Dr. Helmut Marko has already fired that subtle hint at the Mexican. Verstappen seems to have maintained a strong lead at the front after that's pretty much been the conclusion of the whole of Bahrain testing. However, it's Checo, yet again, the article says, who seems to be struggling in what seems to be a car miles ahead of the others. Now, here's the big exclamation mark, which we've already said. Perez, it says here, I don't have the data in front of me, but Perez was 6 to 7 tenths behind Max Verstappen on average throughout the Bahrain test. Now, once again, caveats involved: power mode, car setup, tyres and fuel. However, if at any point they're judging this as like for like, that's absolutely terrible for Sergio Perez, isn't it? Not good at all. 6 to 7 tenths on average slower than Max Verstappen. It's not a good sign, it says, for a driver fighting for his seat. Now, according to a recent report from Automotor and Sport, Helmut Marko had this message for the Mexican driver: Perez needs to get Max out of his head and drive his own program. Yes, he does. I just don't get it. We said throughout most of last year that I don't think Perez is that much slower as he's shown as Max Verstappen. So what's wrong with him? And I think if he doesn't get it sorted, we predicted that if he starts the season similar to how he ended it, he'll be gone by the summer break. And I think Ricciardo or Tsunoda will potentially be in his place for the rest of the season. I don't get it. It's just a massive question mark for me. I just don't understand at all. So, conclusions from testing. This is an interesting article from Planet F1. Drain cover dramas and more, it says, but this is by Oliver Harden. Now, as we know, testing is done. Same old story, it says. Pretty much Red Bull in the lead, absolutely. It says Red Bull's carriage will be rewarded with the RB20. It said every other team would have stuck with what they had, limited the changes to fine-tuning and hammered home the philosophy, but Red Bull are not like every other team. No, they're not. They built an absolute fantastic car, it looks like, this year. And the depressing thing is, because they win every race, I really hope not. And I really hope for a closer season for the sake of F1 and their fans and their viewership and the sponsors. Because if no one's tuning in to watch the races, the audience figures go down. If no one's mentioning it on social media, that goes down. And then the sponsors are going to be like, well, we'll find another sport to invest into. Now, it's not Red Bull's fault. It's up to the other teams to get faster. But that's the depressing concern I've got going into the season. So what are the positives? Well, we got more ground effect equals more lengthy red flags. Okay, not a positive. But it says one of the noteworthy images was that Las Vegas Carlos Sainz drain thing. It was a bitter moment for Sainz, forced to serve that 10-place grid penalty, which was grossly unfair. And frustrating as it may be for all involved, such teething troubles are not uncommon. But as we saw in Bahrain, this could be a theme, and a theme we really very much want to avoid, because now these cars are faster. They've got more downforce. Are they sucking to the ground harder? And if they are, that could be an issue. I mean, think of some of the street circuits like Monaco that really need to weld their drains down. But there we go. So next up, they've got Mercedes and Ferrari. This is a bit of a positive spin, I think. Finally had that solid platform that they've been hoping for. Yes, it was this time last year that the fundamental limitations of their concept finally dawned on both those teams. Over in the silver corner, the W40 was bad, and the SF23 was a temperamental tyre muncher, it says, and it really, really was. I think they sorted it out towards the end of the season, because where Mercedes were quite well known for looking after their tyres, they didn't seem to have that advantage over Ferrari towards the end of last season. So not good at all. But I do feel that it's good in terms of they have a solid base now. Both those cars looked really good in pre-season testing, and I think all the drivers are happy, although they do concede that Red Bull are faster. McLaren are now carrying themselves like a top team. I do think McLaren had one of the worst tests of the Bahrain, but I still think a positive. Their car did look good, and it says here it's always the not so loud ones you've got to watch out for. And it goes, McLaren have been anxious to manage expectations over the winter, wisely refusing to let their impressive 2023 last year's, let's be honest, near miracle transformation convince them, that they're riding an unstoppable tidal wave back to title glory. So, and it says, having been hamstrung by chronically overheating brakes in 22 and 23, this easily marks McLaren's smoothest pre-season test of the ground effect era, a reflection of a team now back on track. Although, once again, I do say it wasn't as smooth as it probably should have been. But everything about McLaren these days suggests that this is the team who aren't going away. And let's hope they can make those improvements throughout the year. And they made more improvements than Red Bull did, the way they caught Red Bull. However, I don't think Red Bull were too worried about improving their car. And it goes, don't expect any miracles from RB, which I thought was interesting. This is one where even Zach Brown is getting moderately excited about, let's say. Basically the RB, last year's Red Bull, not quite, but sort of, half, maybe. And it says, where exactly would Red Bull's new junior team feature in the pecking order? And it said this was one of the key questions heading into Bahrain and one of much interest to Zach Brown. Would a closer technical partnership with the main team, in a similar arrangement, to be fair, it's not against the rules that Haas have Ferrari, bring them into serious contention? And it says the best case scenario of a few early podiums would no doubt do wonders for Ricciardo's campaign. As last season developed, however, it became clear that Aston Martin was slightly flattered by the troubles of Mercedes and Ferrari last year. And it goes on about both Merck and Ferrari were in the process of getting on track, and they ended up being faster than Aston Martin. And it says, in any case, RB appear to have put themselves firmly in the midfield, rather than at the head of it, achieving the Aston-style dream of shattering F1's glass ceiling. So I do think we expect bigger things from RB, but it would appear in testing they're not the second or third fastest car that some people, like Zach Brown, thought they were going to be. So that's the potential running order going into the Bahrain Grand Prix. Yes, things can change. We won't really know 100% until qualifying, and then you've got the race pace on the Saturday. Remember, Thursday practice, Friday qualifying, Saturday the race. If you've made it to the end, like and subscribe. That would be amazing. I really, really appreciate that. Comment below, let us know. If you've done that, you're a world champion. If you do 2 of them or more, you're going to be a multiple world champion in our eyes. Thank you very much for making it to the end. Really appreciate it. Have a lovely day.